Welcome everyone. I think maybe we can start first while we wait for the rest to come and join. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. So today I'll just be giving a short, brief introduction of CoSpace, Spark and Trynkle. So this is actually a collaboration by CoSpace, Spark and Trynkle. So today we will be sharing about the topic on critical thinking. But before we start, let me just share something with you all. So actually CoSpace Park is a co-working office space, and it provides also event space or rental, events collaboration. So we have events collaboration, marketing initiatives, virtual offices, private studios. So this is our main business lah. And we actually during this period we offer bi-weekly event collaboration like with Trynkle, and for partners lah, ranging from on-site events to even online webinars. And ideas are always great, but we believe that with a stronger ecosystem, it can help you build out your business value and exposure. So feel free to follow us on even social media platforms and contact us for further inquiries. And so now I'll be talking a bit about Rish. So actually Rish is a founder of Trynkle, and he has many years of experience in finance, government advisory, and fintech industries. And throughout his career, he has worked in 6 distinct geographies and managed teams of more than 500 people. And in addition, he counsels multiple fintech startups in Southeast Asia. So we are excited for more insights from you this afternoon. And so if you have any questions during the presentation, just feel free to send them in anytime. You don't have to wait until the end, but there will be an allocated time for Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, we'll turn the time over to Rish.
Thanks so much, Anna. Welcome, everyone. Good to see a big crowd today. Thanks for joining us. Let me just share my screen with you guys. So hopefully all of you can see my screen. So today, it's a really interesting topic. It's something I think a lot of you can relate to in terms of, how you should be thinking or what is the most effective way of thinking, and how you can bring that into your day-to-day life, and specifically how it can help you solve problems, deal with people, build relationships, etc. And I think over the last kind of 10 to 12 years, critical thinking has become a really paramount skill set that people really should learn. It probably hasn't got as much traction as some of the other things, but today hopefully I'll give you an overview and you can see how it can benefit you quite a lot in all walks of life. And I don't think it really matters, what you do for a living or whether you're in a relationship or whatever. I think it's one of the core skills. It's something that I'm quite passionate about in particular because I think it's something that's missing in current society. So we're just going to talk through that. As usual, please leave your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them later. We've got a bit of extra time today, so just leave whatever you want to discuss. It's quite a broad topic, so even if there are examples that you want to go through, by all means, let's do it. So we're going to talk about critical thinking in a quite different way today. I mean, it's a pretty interesting topic just as critical thinking itself, but when you bring in aspects of leadership, your own mental situation and thought processes, it becomes a bigger kind of animal. So we're gonna, we're gonna try and dissect a few of those parts today, and hopefully it brings you a bit more context about critical thinking and how you can apply it to your day-to-day life. So, my journey, most of you know my journey by now. For those of you who don't know, as Anna mentioned, I was working in finance for pretty much 15 years, did pretty well in finance and kind of started doing my own thing in startups and my own kind of therapy consultancy. And I've kind of just been dumped into this world of critical thinking from a pretty young age. I was brought up in the UK school system where the school system is orientated towards people thinking for themselves and understanding why they're saying things. And as I went through my working career, I realized that it was really, really important to actually understand why you think in certain ways. That's part one. And then using that, try to optimize it to make the right decisions in life. So for instance, if you've got a project, how do you make the project as efficient as possible? Is your decision-making process efficient and coherent and correct? Relationship, are you making the right decision as towards all the offers that you have on the table? When is the optimal time to get married? When is the right time to die? All these things are really small examples of how critical thinking is A, important, but B, also overlooked You know, a lot of us think we are in control of a lot of our thoughts more than we actually are. And we're going to touch on that later. So those are a few aspects of it. And recently, what I do, and for those of you who are interested in this topic later, I do a lot of therapy, specifically with regards to critical thinking, helping people understand their thought processes and understand exactly why they are thinking things in a certain way. Okay. And I think that's important, especially in the age of the internet and social media. So, you know, how many times have we all just sat in bed or in the car or on the bus or, you know, on our commute to work and thought about something? And we don't really understand why it goes into our mind. We don't really understand what was the inception of that thought process, but it's there. You know, whether you're thinking about your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your dog or your cat or the food that you want to eat or the party that you want to go to, whatever, it's something in your mind. And more often than not, it's something that causes you to think further. So for instance, you know, you go into work in the morning and you think on the bus, oh, what am I going to have for lunch? And you can't decide. And then that thought leads to another thought, leads to another thought, leads to another thought. And suddenly you're in a thought process that is probably out of control and you're just kind of thinking about it. So what critical thinking kind of aims to do is kind of rein that back in a bit. You know, why am I thinking about my lunch? Is it because I'm genuinely hungry, or is it just because I saw an advert that has a huge McDonald's burger on it? Is it because someone was holding a packed lunch next to me? And it tries to analyze those, not to dismiss the thought, but more so that you understand why you're thinking about things. And if you think about it in context of, say, a working environment where you're supposed to be working, but instead you're thinking about lunch, it helps you deal with that. So it helps you focus on something as opposed to kind of letting your mind have free reign. And I think an important part to this now is, as I mentioned, we live in a very digital world now. So our influences are coming from everywhere. They're coming from your phone, your watch, your computer screen. They're coming from people next to you. They're coming from billboards. They're coming from cars, everywhere. So how much of your thought process is actually you independently thinking versus loads of biased, uninformed, prejudicial information that we just pick up? And a good example of this is COVID, right? Like if you think about COVID, where do we get all our information source about COVID? Usually the news or the internet. Now, depending on those outlets, they can either be very biased or misinformed, or they can be really, really accurate. And as you see people deal with those situations in very different ways, the more pessimistic, cynical people tend to overthink things to a dramatic degree, and the more optimistic and positive people don't do that, but then maybe don't focus on the details as much. So we're going to analyze a bit of those things. And this idea of shoddy thinking is really important, because what shoddy thinking essentially means is, have I thought about something enough to be confident in my decision? And a good example is people who maybe don't think about buying the cost of buying a car, or do they need a car? Or someone who thinks about, oh, I should get married by the age of 27, but do I really need to be married? Have I found the person to be married? And those are good examples of kind of shoddy thinking where you've probably got about 70 to 80% of the information you need to make a decision, but you definitely haven't processed that information as effectively as you probably could have. And then you have these times in life where you make bad decisions. And most bad decisions can come back to shoddy thinking in most cases. So what is critical thinking? The ability to think clearly and rationally. And I think that's really important. I think clearly, especially, like, how often do you have a thought that is really, truly and utterly clear, transparent, and free from any outside influence or any type of disturbance or misinformed information? It's very, very rare. And it's also this idea of understanding connections between each other. So the logical connection. So why am I going and buying this? Why do I want to work for this company? Why do I want to buy an iPhone over Samsung? They're all decision trees. They're all logical connections. And a lot of people don't necessarily think of them as connections. And then when they're making the decision, sometimes they get lost because they can't backtrack and say, well, actually, I wanted to buy an iPhone because I like the way it looks, or because I like iOS, or because they had the app that I wanted to download. And that's the kind of idea behind critical thinking and building these connections, which ultimately make you a more intelligent and sound judge of character and sound decision maker, because it's essentially building an evidence tree to yourself. So if I were to buy a car and I say, well, okay, what's my budget? So I look at my bank account and I have $1,000. Okay, I can only buy a car worth $1,000. Oh, I like blue cars, so I decided on the color. Oh, I can't afford to buy a 5-seater car, so I need to buy a 3-seater car, things like that. And you build connections and decision trees. And I've explained it in a very slow mechanism, a slow method, but actually they're much faster in reality. And it's just about practice and practice and practice. And this is something you can use in your personal life as well as in the professional life. So when you do all that, as I've described, what do you get? You get what's called a cultivated thinker, okay? And a cultivated thinker is just another way of saying someone who's confident and someone who's more robust in how they think and how they see the world. They understand the links between ideas. They're able to spot errors and inconsistencies really fast. I'm sure you guys have seen that at work or at school, where there's someone in the class or there's someone in the office who just spots problems and can spot, is really good at their work. They're able to do that. They're open-minded, okay? So it's not just about thinking your view is the right view. It's also about being open-minded, that have I exhausted all other possibilities out there? Have I listened to what John told me? Have I listened to what Anna told me? Have I listened to what my parents told me? And I think that's really important, because we live in a world where usually one view isn't only one view isn't the right answer. So merging, amalgamating, collaborating on views and alternate types of thought is really important. And a critical thinker is able to do that. They're able to step back and say, look, I'm going to take the best ideas from A, the best ideas from B, and the best ideas from C and join them together. And more often than not, that makes a better product, it makes a better person, it makes a better decision. Communicating. No point being a really good thinker if you don't have the ability to communicate that outwards to others or in a forum. It could be texting, it could be vocally, it could be with your parents, it could be with anything, it could be a voice note, whatever. But the ability to communicate why you are thinking clearly and understanding these logical connections that you have built is so key, because that's how you get a reputation for being a critical thinker. You get a reputation for being intelligent in your ability to communicate that across effectively. So just imagine a typical work scenario, like, the office wants to change location from Singapore to Thailand, and someone who comes in the room and is confident and communicates that, well, maybe Thailand is the best idea because of ABC reasons, is someone who's going to have more buy-in. People are going to look up to that person and they're going to think, well, that guy knows what he's talking about. That lady knows what she's talking about. And that cultured critical thinker is born, if you like. Now, you get people who can communicate really effectively. But when they communicate, they'll be amazing at the communication part. But you'll see their substance behind what they're communicating is weak. And, those are the guys who, just kind of fluffy guys who don't necessarily understand the base of what they're communicating, but are really good at communicating effectively. So what we're trying to do in this whole presentation is develop this idea of a cultivated critical thinker, someone who's a rounded individual, who can determine the importance of things, is open-minded, can identify inconsistencies and problems in other people's reasonings, and sees the links between ideas. And like I said, through all walks of life. So it all comes back to this notion of the mind, right? And as I told you, the first thing I said was, imagine you guys are on a bus or on your way to work, and your mind is just functioning at such a rapid rate. Now, for some people, it's really hard for them to control. They've got a billion ideas going on, and things just sometimes, they just lose control of what's actually going on. So they're thinking about food, they're thinking about their partner, they're thinking about their parents, they're thinking about their work, they're thinking about all these things. And if you're thinking about so many things, it makes sense that you can't focus on the one thing that you should be doing at that point in time. So a really good example I give some of the students that I coach is, well, you're in an exam hall and you sit there at your desk with your pen and paper, and you're only supposed to be focused on that piece of paper. But then you look up and you see your friend, she's wearing a pink dress. And then you start to think, well, I wanted to buy that pink dress. And then suddenly you're not focusing on question 3, you're focusing on her pink dress. And then suddenly you see a clock at the end of the room and you think, oh, wow, that's similar to the clock that my grandfather had. And now you're reminiscing about your grandfather instead of focusing on question 5. And it's the ability not to say that you shouldn't be focused on those other things, but you should be focused on them for minimal time possible to prioritize what it is you're doing. So if I'm thinking about the clock and I'm thinking about grandfather, I should be in a position to say, oh, that looks like my grandfather's clock, but I should be here focusing on question 5. I'll think about grandfather's clock later. And that's the difference between someone who can process their thought process clearly, as opposed to someone who gets bogged down in the ideas that are kind of floating around their mind. And everyone goes through it. Everyone goes through that process where they get bogged down, they get distracted, etc. And there are different skills that people are coming up with on a day-to-day basis to change that. But the first skill you need to learn is understand the idea of focusing and why you're focusing. And that's not to say other things shouldn't come into your mind. It's just that they should be deprioritized in your thought process. And that's what makes you a stronger leader, stronger, more intellectual person, a better critical thinker. So think about your thought process. There's a really good diagram on the left there. Imagine it's a plane runway and you're seeing two planes and you see one plane just literally going up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, you're automatically going to think that pilot doesn't have a clue what they're doing. You know, why are they on the runway moving like some kind of snake? And it just looks weird and probably dangerous. And then you've got a focus mind, which is very, very simple, very, very linear in thought, because the optimal, the thing that they're trying to achieve is how do I get from A to B in an optimal fashion? That's all it is. That's all critical thinking is actually. How do I get from A to B in the most effective, honest, direct fashion? Now, you can be the plane that goes like that. You'll still get to B, but you probably would have been distracted by 1,000 things. You probably would have had 7 crashes. You probably would have had your whole, plane full of people screaming for most of that journey. But the pilot who goes straight from A to B in an effective way, it's just seamless. It's calm. So think of your mind like that. When you're doing a task, think of it. How can I be straight through? How can I do straight through processing? Loads of you would have had this at work when you talk about operations and systems and stuff. How does my mind do straight through processing? How do I get from A to B in as effective and quick as time as possible? And one of the best ways is not wasting time on thinking about unnecessary things. Okay. So we're always, as human beings, we're so good at this. And the best example of this is social media. Well, I've got 10 minutes. Let me go and figure out what Kylie Jenner's doing. Well, okay. I mean, if you have 10 minutes genuinely free, there's nothing wrong with seeing what Kylie Jenner's doing. Or if you have an hour free and you want to watch Ronaldo clips at Manchester United, there's nothing wrong with doing that because you don't have anything to focus on. And your thought process can be vague, it can be open, it can be relaxed. But when you have things to focus on and you're like, well, you know what, all right, let me just go on my phone. And then you're looking at Kylie Jenner's Instagram. Suddenly, your focus has been completely realigned from where it should be to where it is. And that's one of the problems with social media. It's one of the most amazing tools in the world because it gives you information, not always right information, but gives you information. But it also is a distraction mechanism. It's a way of getting out of your hourly or daily or monthly routine and distracting yourself from what you should be doing. So maybe one of the solutions to managing your thought process is to cut down on social media. And people have done studies and they've analyzed it and they've realized that actually people that do cut down their social media time or say that I'm only going to use social media at specific times or watch TV at specific times, actually they become more focused on the things that they should be doing. And like I said, it may not be grand things. It doesn't need to be building a car. It doesn't need to be, something work orientated. It could just be baking a cake. Maybe your cake will be more effective if you're not on the phone or on TV at the same time you're baking the cake. Okay. When you're at work, you probably are going through a thought process. Well, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? Well, most people on average have repeat meals every week. I mean, they have different things, but they also have repeat meals. So for instance, most families in America buy KFC at least once or twice a week. So then you go into office in the morning and then you think, well, actually, I can't focus on my work because I'm thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner. Well, what you're going to have for dinner only really matters when it's for dinner, right? So you still have many hours to make that decision. That's one thing. Even if you don't have many hours to make a decision, you have to take stuff out of the freezer, etc. It's still a plan. It's still something that's in the future. Secondly is, well, the chances are you're overthinking that because you are thinking about what you should be having for dinner instead of just making a decision based on prior experiences of what you've had for dinner, okay? So this idea that we are socially constructed in so many ways to lose focus and not be effective is actually a really, really strong problem that the world is facing. We've got so many external distractions. We've got people coming up to us and talking to us. We've got video calls. We've got, Tinder notifications. We've got emails. We've got everything is just constructed in a way that we are not able to focus. So what do? You tend to, the idea that you should remove yourself from that situation is actually a really good idea. So limit your TV time to when you are actually free. Think about social media in terms of, well, that's a hobby for me. That's not my focus. That's a hobby for me when I'm on the toilet or when I'm just about to have a shower, or just before I put the kids to bed, or whatever it is, and deconstruct the things that are actually driving your distractions. And I think that's really, really important. And one thing I would advise all of you to do is go sit down, just sit down in a coffee shop with a pen and paper and write a list of all the things that you believe are distracting you. I guarantee social media will be top one or two. I guarantee friends and family will probably be the top one or two. Gossiping, finding out what's going on, who did that, who's doing what. TV programs. How many of us have become defocused because we wanted to watch season 8 of Game of Thrones? How many of us are defocused because, Netflix has had a pop-up and said they've got a new movie or a new Korean drama or whatever? So there's a socially constructed environment we are living in that is orientated to us not thinking straight. So remove ourselves from those environments, or at least manage your time and project manage yourself so that those external factors are at specific times so that you know when you can focus and when you don't have to focus. And like I said at the beginning, once you get that straight line, once you're going from A to B in a straight and smooth path as possible, you'll have less anxiety, less stress, because you know exactly what you're doing and when you're doing it, and there'll be less pressure on you. Because what happens when you're distracted? Your boss comes to you, like at work, you're distracted, you haven't done your work properly, your boss comes to you, scolds you and says, well, I need this now faster. I need you to redo it. So the pressure's gone up, the stress has gone up, you're more anxious, decreased productivity. So think about those things, make that list, think about the things that actually are going in your mind. Are you always thinking about your girlfriend coming home on time? Are you always thinking about your boyfriend cheating on you? Are you always thinking about whether your dog is sick or well, or whether you have enough money to buy your grandmother a birthday present? List them down and think about whether they're actually things worth causing stress and anxiety, or they're just things that you've created or society has created for you to just basically become that wandering line that isn't really focused on anything. How did you do that? Well, a lot of you would have probably heard, and I know there's a few of you in the audience as well, like you would have heard things like mindfulness, you would have heard things like build routines or have a diary. I mean, there's a real valid explanations. There's a real valid solution, to what will give you a clearer thought process. And I'm not going to dismiss any of them, but I've summed them up into 3 main bubbles. First one is to stay focused. I mean, sounds really stupid, but really none of us, not a lot of us, are really clear on what our goals and objectives are. And the goals and objectives are not big things like losing 50 kg, right? Or traveling to Paris. They're valid goals and objectives, but they can also be much more micro level objectives. They can be, well, I don't want to eat chocolate today. Or I want to reply to 50 emails today. Or I want to drink 1 liter of water. Or I want to leave work 5 minutes earlier than I left work on Friday. These are specific goals and objectives that give you something to aim for. And that's really important, because unless you really understand what it is you're aiming for, it's just a kind of meandering river underneath it, right? If you don't know where you're going, so you don't care how you get there because you don't know where you're going, right? And I think it's important to highlight your goals. Second thing is rules. Rules and routine are some of the most, to me, they're some of the best things. There's a lot of people out there like to be free spirits, not have rules and routine. I, on the other hand, like rules and routine because they give a structure to my life and to my day. So for instance, one of the things people always advise people to do is have a healthy meal in the morning, have a healthy breakfast, have a good breakfast in the morning. So it sets your day up, right? I don't actually eat breakfast, but that's one of my rules. And the rule is that because I don't eat breakfast, I'm going to force myself to have a very good dinner, okay? It's probably not the best advice from a health point of view, but it's a rule of riches. And it works for me. And it gives my life structure because it means that every day I need to know exactly what I want to have for dinner. And it needs to be substantial enough to cover the 2 previous meals, right? So that's just a weird example of a rule that applies to me. But it also causes my brain to know every day that dinner is coming and dinner is something I need to focus on because of I haven't eaten breakfast or lunch. Drinking water. I make a point to drink water at 5 minutes past every hour, okay? It's a rule. Sounds like a rubbish rule, but it's actually a rule that adds structure to me. It doesn't make me think about when I'm going to drink water next or have I drunk enough water. I know if I do it in that structured way, it works. So this idea of having rules, like saving money, saying I love you to your wife or your husband, things like that, they give you a construct that actually allows your mind to focus. And I think they can be important. And I wouldn't advise people to have a whole life full of rules where everything is a rule, but have enough rules that they provide structure for your day, for your mind, and for the rest of the activities that you're doing. And it's a way of foolproofing yourself against errors as well, right? So if you know you have to take out the trash at 6 o'clock every morning, you will take out the trash at 6 o'clock. There's no chance of you forgetting. It comes the rule, you can set an alarm, you can do whatever you want to do, and it's important. The last one, self-awareness. A lot of people will confuse this with mindfulness. They're a bit different. Self-awareness is very introspective, about really analyzing your own mind. Mindfulness is more about kind of being in the moment. You don't necessarily need to do the analysis and awareness part. I'm much more into self-awareness. So what does self-awareness mean? In the easiest way I can explain this to you is, if there is a book about Risha's mind, do I know every page of that book? And if I don't know every page of that book, am I trying to learn and recite and memorize every page of that book? And it's really that simple. Imagine your mind is a blank sheet of paper and you need to memorize and understand different bits and bobs of that paper. And why is that important? Because you can't really make decisions about your own life unless you really understand what are your drivers, why you're a certain way. Why don't I eat? For instance, I'm allergic to egg. So I needed to understand how I became allergic to egg, why I wasn't eating egg when I was younger and now I'm not eating egg. No, it's a way of being aware of what you are and who you are. Understand why you don't like sour food, understand why you only like people of this personality type, etc. And this idea of understanding your own personality, your own mind, gives you a greater understanding of where to focus on in the future. Because obviously, if you understand something completely, the amount of focus you need to apply to it can be reduced. But if there are parts of your brain where you don't understand it, like how am I going to react when I go up a roller coaster? There's no way you can self-awarely analyze that. You probably have to take the plunge and go on the roller coaster. But you could go on YouTube and look at roller coasters. You could go on smaller roller coasters first, etc. So it becomes a real introspection into you and what are the best practices for you. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, are aspiring to leadership roles or are leaders in the audience. This is something I learned very late in my life, probably maybe late 20s, early 30s. It's something that a lot of people go to kind of things like MBA school to learn, but you don't really need to do that. But I mean, it's helpful, but you don't necessarily need to do that. But being a leader, you can be really great at your job and not be a good leader. And you can be really great at your job and be a good leader. And the distinction between the two is in your ability to think in a slightly different way as a leader, okay? And one of those critical skills that you need to learn is critical thinking. Why? Because as a leader, you're pretty much in charge of decision-making or some portion of decision-making. And you're definitely in charge of a direction, whether it's a team, a function, an organization, a country, whatever type of leadership it is, there's a direction you need to lead. And critical thinking is really important for those two aspects. And as you grow up, as you mature through your job, through life, through relationships, the level of critical thinking that you have needs to be more in-depth. It needs to be more decisive. It needs to be more self-aware. And some of this diagram is essentially aimed at helping people understand, how do I go from just being an average kind of minion thinker where I'm just like the rest of the population to being someone who's a superstar? How do I become an Elon Musk? How do I become a Jeff Bezos? How do I become a Boris Johnson? How do I become a great political leader? How do I become a philosopher, an intellectual thinker? And some of these things will help you. Not every one of them is achievable, but some of them are helpful. And these are not things that you necessarily need to, wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to do this. They should in some way be implicit to your day-to-day life. And you can do them in any of the activities you're doing, but you should be mindful and be aware of them. So let's take a couple. Be open-minded and stay curious. Important, because like I said, ideas, people, society is changing all the time, even in work. So be open-minded to different ideas, be open-minded to different cultures, be open-minded to different types of criticism. Stay curious means continually learning. Always search for that article that you haven't read. Always search for that viewpoint that you may not have read. Technology has changed in such a dramatic way. Are you on top of that technology? Do you understand what's coming next week, next month, next year? If you don't, why not? Get ahead of the curve and learn those things. Another one, assimilate new knowledge and experiences. So every time you learn something new, every time you pick up a new piece of knowledge or you have a very new experience in life, try to bring that into your personality. Try to learn something from that. try to think of a way of that contributed to my mind becoming stronger. It contributed to me making a more informed decision. It's going to contribute to me being a more practical person in the future. Observe and listen carefully. Probably the most important thing on this list. The most amount of learning that you get in life is from observation and listening. It's true for kids. It's much more true for kids than it is adults, but it's true throughout the whole human existence. So if you've got a kid who's 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, you've always probably referred to them at some stage as a sponge, or they copy what mommy and daddy says. And that's because all they're doing is observing and listening. And they don't have the literature or the academic knowledge to buffer that. As adults, we do, and we choose not to observe something, or we choose not to listen to something. I choose to put my AirPods on and just ignore people. But at a young age, you can't do that. So you become a sponge. You don't have any barriers to entry in terms of the knowledge that you can acquire. And as an adult, maybe we should go back to that. You've got a whole internet at your disposal. Observe things, YouTube videos. Observe how your neighbor behaves on a day-to-day basis. Observe whether people are throwing rubbish or recycling in the effective ways that they can. Observe weather changes, whatever it is. Listen to people around you, pick up knowledge. It will be a really, really important thing to do, because the great leaders out there are not just great because they sit at their desk and order people and tell them what to do. It's also because they observe and listen to the dynamics of their team, the dynamics of their family, the dynamics of their society. And they're able to pick up on that, and they become empathetic to it, right? And if you look at some of the great leaders in the world that we have at the moment, it's actually more because they're stronger observers and listeners. It's not just because they're intellectually strong people. They're actually very observant. They can pick up, the psychology of their society. They can pick up how their voters are going to vote, things like that. And it's really, really important. The other one I would say is brainstorming. So it says brainstorm solution-focused ideas. It's a bit waffly, but this is essentially always have a solution in mind when you're thinking about something. So for instance, I'm thinking about what am I going to have for dinner. It's no point just me saying, well, I like Thai food, or I like hot pot, or I like, Cadbury's cream eggs, or whatever it is. I need to have a solution. Where is the nearest Thai food? Because if the nearest Thai food is in 5 cities away from me, it's not going to be helpful to my decision. If all the hot pot restaurants near me are closed, then it's not going to be a helpful decision to me, right? So have a solution in mind. Oh, I like Thai food. I like that restaurant. Oh, I like hot pot. That place is open. It's having a deal. I can go there. Things like that. And it works for every walk of life, especially in a working environment, because you're being asked to solutionize things. You're being asked to prepare a piece of work and give solutions. But it applies to every part of life. So think about the end result. Like I gave you the example of A to B. Well, think about what B is. Is B you sitting in a restaurant having food? Is B buying a new car? Is B you getting married to the person that you've loved for your entire life? Brainstorm it. Think about that web that goes on a whiteboard when you're doing it at work, and try to put that into your mind. Brainstorm it. And there's nothing wrong with physically writing it down. Oh, I want to go to Paris for New Year's Eve. Well, how am I going to go to Paris? Okay, I need to take a flight. Oh, but now there's COVID. Oh, is Paris even open? Is the Eiffel Tower even open? Have I done my jabs? It becomes an intricate brainstorming web. And the first 1,000 times you do this, it may sound slow, like I've just processed it the way I've explained to you. But the next 1,000 times, it will just become automatic. It'll become very seamless. It's like a computer. It'll just become very seamless that you've thought about things, and you'll say Paris, COVID, blah, 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 and it just results in a decision. And the strongest thinkers out there are obviously the people that can do that in the fastest possible time. So think about those things and make informed decisions. Sometimes the most informed decision may not be the right decision, but at least it's an informed decision. The worst thing that can happen is you don't make an informed decision, or you make an uninformed decision, and it leads to a horrible result. But if you made an informed decision and it still leads to a horrible result, it's probably just an external factor like bad luck or bad weather or an earthquake or whatever. But make informed decisions. And the more you go through life, the more informed your decision should be, and the faster that decision-making matrix should happen. So think about those things. And for those of you who are aspiring to be leaders, this is super critical, because when you're a leader, when I was a leader, when I was the COO and CFO, I used to get on average about 500 to 600 emails a day. I didn't even have time to read all my emails. I had people coming to my office all the time. I was making decisions worth millions, billions of dollars. And I wasn't able to sit back all the time and do what I just described and say, okay, let's go there, let's do this, let's do that. It had to be faster. And that just comes with experience. It comes with the ability to have all these things working in parallel, in tandem, and at a fast pace. And ultimately, you should be, when you make a decision, you should be in a position to say, well, look, I think I've ticked every box. I think I've crossed enough T's and dotted enough I's to make that decision, and I'm confident in it. And if the decision goes well, great, you take responsibility for it. If the decision goes badly, you still take responsibility for it, but you understand that you've done as much as you could to make the best decision available at the time. So let's talk about a few everyday examples. I've given quite a few already, but let's break it down. So let's take the idea of choosing a career path. It's one of the most horrible topics that I face on a day-to-day basis, where people come to me and say, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what degree to do. I don't know what job to do. And then you delve into the subject and you talk to them, and then suddenly you'll hear new things like, oh, my parents want me to do this, or this career earns more money, or I don't want to do this exam. And they're really good at vocalizing that to me because I'm their therapist or I'm their mentor. But why can't they vocalize that to themselves? Why can't they build that out? Well, what career path do I want to do? Well, okay, my parents want me to be a doctor, but I'm not interested. Okay, so that crosses that road. But I'm really interested in marketing. Oh, wow, there's a bunch of new marketing jobs available now. Well, maybe I'll go there. And marketing pays well. And, oh no, but I don't like digital marketing. I want non-digital marketing. So, okay, we've made decisions, but it's a thought process. And people are really good at explaining their thoughts to other people, but not necessarily to themselves. So when you're choosing your career path, it's really important that you break it down to its core components. Why are you even having a career? Is it just to earn money? If it is, then just go for the most highly paid job out there. Is it because you want some satisfaction between 9 and 5 every day? Okay, so we need to start thinking about interests, gifts, passions that you have, hobbies that you have. Is it because you want to work for, I don't know, an NGO because you're empathetic and you're more of a charitable mindset? Well, okay, fine. So at least we've aligned that and list them down. So it's a good example of critical thinking in a way of going from A to B in an effective way by listing everything down in between and basically building a road path for yourself. Well, I don't want to do that. Okay, I'll go that way. I don't want to do that. I'll go that way. Oh, I want to do that. So I've gone there, and you make a decision. And exactly to my next example with a map. So maybe most of you are probably not old enough, but when I was very young, we didn't have obviously phones and maps. We had the whole A to Z. In London, we call it the A to Z, where you literally open it up and you say, okay, I'm going to go there, and you flick through pages and you literally move your finger on a map and you say, okay, turn left, turn right. Well, turn left, turn right is a really good example of thinking and critical thinking at that point in time. And it's a logical connections. But now we have Google Maps, or we have Waze, or whatever it is you use, and they do it all for you, right? So try to make your life or your thought process like Waze. And what does Waze do? You've got people coming in and telling you, oh, there's a traffic jam there, or there's a police roadblock there, or whatever. And they're logical connections. They're points where you need to think, okay, well, I need to assess the information and move on. I'll change my route. I won't change my route. And Google Maps is a really good example of this. I never was a fan of Google Maps. I was always of the mind that people should be focused on the road and people should learn directions themselves. But for me to learn all those directions and take out external factors like traffic jams and roadblocks and things like that, rain or whatever, it was impossible. I'd have to have about 10 different information sources. That's why I use Google Maps. So why don't I just make my mind like Google Maps? So I think about that when I go out. I do use Google Maps sometimes, but I also think about, well, what's the most effective way of going from A to B? I think it's that way. Let me verify that with Google Maps. So it's another good example of what you're doing like in your everyday life, and Google Maps is really, really good. Well, any map app is really, really good example of that. Sorry. These two is another, how much, think about on a day-to-day basis, how much information is given to you, okay? Friends, family, social media, websites, work colleagues, etc. Now, how much of that is real and informed, so proper information, versus misinformed and maybe fake news, etc. And think about whether you're actually making the decision to process that. This is really, really important, really, really important, because if I go on Facebook now and I say, okay, first thing that comes up, oh, new COVID variant in Moscow is going to kill half the world's population. Wow, I mean, if I'm just a basic thinker, I'm probably going to panic, get anxious, and think, well, now I can't go on holiday. I'm probably going to die in 6 months, and the whole world is going to be like a zombie apocalypse. But if I was actually able to process that information, so well, actually, well, news coming out of Moscow about COVID, well, that sounds odd. New variants, maybe, yeah, there's a few new variants floating around. Kill half the world, well, that doesn't make sense because the current variants haven't done that. And you start to think of things in a way of connecting the dots. And this is really important because the internet is a really great source of information if it's known, if it's used properly, if people know how to use it properly. But if they don't know how to use it properly and they're totally reliant on things like social media feeds, Twitter is a really good example of an awful information source, then they're just basing all their judgments and decision-making on crappy information sources, which is horrible. It's a horrible thing to do. And it's a very dangerous trap because it's very difficult to get out of. And I see it every day. I see people near me or close to me. Oh, you know what? I want to know what happened in the Manchester United match. They'll go on Twitter, Manchester United. And then they might scroll down and see, 1-1 versus Chelsea, but they'll probably see, well, oh, Ronaldo got injured. Well, Ronaldo didn't even start the match. Or they might see, well, it was snowing in London. Okay, but the match, but it wasn't snowing in London, it was snowing outside of London. So you need to be in a position where you can see the wood from the trees and be able to decipher information and use and factual information in a proper way. And the only way to do that is to challenge. Be observant, challenge, re-challenge, and get into this iterative process of not only just questioning, applying your own intelligence, re-questioning, applying your own intelligence. And I think that's really important. And it goes on to the next idea of self-evaluating your contribution. Are you in a position to say that you have done things to the best of your ability? And are you in a position to say that you've given your all to a specific task? And you guys do this at work. You have KPIs, you have performance evaluations, etc. They're really important ways of being self-aware and self-assessing, but they're really also really important ways of actually just writing down things so that others see what's going through your mind. So when you're doing a performance evaluation, don't just think about, oh, how am I going to persuade my boss that I'm a great employee? Also, think of it in a way as, well, I need to be transparent with my boss to show that I'm not happy with this, I'm happy with this, I want to do this going forward, I don't want to do this going forward. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to not see the task for just what's on the paper. It needs to be above and beyond that. And critical thinking comes into this really importantly because don't assume that the logical connections in your mind are obvious to other people. So when you're doing your performance evaluation, try to build those logical connections on paper. Well, I'm doing tasks slower because John has given me more work to do on the side, or Anna is not good at her job and I'm spending too much time helping her. I'm doing tasks really fast because you put me on this training program before. Try to build connections in people's minds so that people are able to evaluate you in just an effective way as you evaluate yourself. And that's really important for you that want to climb the corporate ladder, because it's not just the people that are really, really good at their jobs that climb the corporate ladder. It's the people who are able to communicate that they are good at their jobs. If you're one of those persons who's exceptionally good at their work but never talks about it, or never highlights it to their manager, the chances are you're going to be stuck in a very similar position for the majority of your career, unless the manager themselves is observant enough to see the work you're doing. So you're putting a lot of your career reputation on reliance on a manager being able to observe that. So why not just put it on the paper and pour it out and critically think through your work process so that it's obvious to your manager. Truth in advertising, we talked about it a bit earlier. I mean, the Facebook and Instagram examples are the best. I mean, if you just go on Instagram now, you'll probably see an ad within 20 seconds, probably faster. And it'll probably be an ad which is pretty convincing at telling you that you need something, whether it's gin in this case or a new laptop. The big one that's happening in my life at the moment is this whole OmniDesk thing. So every time I open Instagram, oh, it's an OmniDesk. It's amazing. You won't get back problems. You can stand up. It looks cool because it's black, it's minimalist. But then if I think about it, well, do I have back problems or no? Do I like to stand up? No. And do I like black? Well, yes. Okay. So there's 1 out of 3 that really is applicable to me. But the way the advertising world works is they're really good at making you think that you need something that you don't necessarily think. Someone like me who critically thinks through a particular problem will be able to say, well, no, and dismiss that ad. Whereas a lot of people will be like, well, okay, wait, let's go and see Omni this. Well, how many people have got it? 5-star reviews. Okay, but those reviews are all from one person. Oh, wait, hold on, I'll get it. And that is the kind of trap that we're in at the moment, where people are being led on paths that they don't necessarily need to be led on. And, you know, if someone told you to jump off a cliff, you wouldn't go and jump off a cliff. If someone came and said, well, Rish, jump off the cliff because it's an amazing dive and you love diving and it's going to be the best experience of your life, then maybe I might think about it, right? So think about that when you're getting advertising and social media bombarding you with ideas. Work-related decision-making, I won't talk about it. We talked about it a bit before, but also think about things before you make decisions at work. Committing to a task is a really good thing. I used to tell my staff, well, I want you guys to do this. Most of them would just say, Rich, okay, fine, we'll do it. Once in a while, I'll get someone who's confident enough to say, well, you know what? I don't think I'm good enough to do that task. Or I need more time than you're giving me. And those are the people who have thought through that decision-making process. So like, how do you do it? You know, I've talked a lot about it and it sounds really easy when Rish says it, but how do you actually do it? Well, there's a few things. For those of you who are parents, you know, well, even those of you who are younger, start thinking about it. I mean, the best way to start doing it is to start thinking about it, why you need to do it. You know, think about the decisions or the bad decisions that you're maybe making now and think about whether you're actually thinking about them or they're just happening kind of ad hoc out of your control. Ask thoughtful questions. Ask people around you about their interests, what they're doing, etc. And what do they think about you? Do they think that you make good decisions? Do they think that you don't? Are they someone that you trust? Someone they can empathize with? Things like that. Challenge yourself to get a deeper understanding of subject and topic. This is just continual learning. Watching, a good example is if I asked you all to read War and Peace, I would hazard a guess that 50 to 70% of you would probably just go on YouTube and look for some kind of book review or some kind of cheat sheet on War and Peace. If you do that, you'll understand what War and Peace is about, but you won't understand the deeper understanding of what War and Peace was and why it was one of the greatest novels of all time. Okay, it's a bit like me telling you watch Avengers Endgame and telling you all that, oh, by the way, Thanos will be destroyed at the end. It's like, well, okay, that helps, but how do they destroy Thanos? Okay, so challenge yourself to have a deeper understanding of anything that you're doing or anything that you're involved in. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't take on too much when you have the option to not take on too much. Deal with your biases. This is important. It's a bit to do with the social media thing that we were talking about earlier. You know, make sure that you're not being impacted by natural biases around you, like what your parents think, or you know, by reading one news article, you suddenly think that the whole world is institutionally racist and you have a bias towards it. Or because you worked in a company one time and there were 10 employees and 9 of them were women, so all companies must be gender unequal, right? Think about why you're thinking about things and the biases that may be applying to your life. Consider the consequences of the options. I think that's just standard. The other two things I would really ask you to kind of think about is, one is take time to think and rethink. Like that's a genuine act. It's not just about sitting at your desk. It's allocating time to think about something and then rethink about it. And maybe a good way of doing this is to maybe watch your favorite movie or listen to your favorite Ed Sheeran song and then say, well, what was it about? Why do I like it? And then rethink it. And those small examples can lead to bigger examples at work and relationships, etc. And you get into this process of actually really thinking about things as opposed to just assuming things, which a lot of people do. The last one I'll say is be aware of your mental processes. It goes back to self-awareness and diversify your thoughts. Just try and be as rounded and as exposed an individual as you possibly can be. You're probably never going to be as fully diversified or as fully exposed as you can. You know, that's just impossible for anyone, but try yourself. And we live in a world that is pretty global, connected by a web interface. So you can. And people's views about, say, you know, I don't know, COVID in South America may just be different to Asia. People's views about Avengers Endgame may be different in North America as they may be in China. So diversify your thoughts based on education and constantly learning things. So those are a couple of ideas that I had with regards to critical thinking. I see we've got some questions. We're going to tackle them in a minute. I would really just recommend all of you guys not overthink about being critical thinkers, but just think about, well, how can I understand my mind more effectively, which is the self-awareness part, and how do I ensure that the decisions that I'm making are the most apt, efficient decisions? And it goes back to my straight line versus my wavy line. Okay. And I think those are really important parts that you need to take away. Am I convoluting and complicating my thought process with distractions and external focuses? Or am I actually really in control of what I'm thinking? And it's really remarkable when you meet people who are really in control of what they're thinking. Sometimes you don't have to agree with them, but it's remarkable that they're so convinced and they seem so informed with the decision that they've made. And I think those are some of the important things that I really would want you guys to think about going forward. Next time, we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic. So please join us for that. That's on the 13th. What will society be like in 2030? It's a question I get asked a lot, like what does the future hold? Obviously, the last 2 years have been pretty awful for everybody. So, people are thinking more about the future and, when they can go traveling, is the world going to be a good place, climate change, all the rest of it, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to be talking about that in pretty in-depth way in 2 weeks' time. So join us for that. And after that, for those of you on the business side, we've got another session on emerging business trends, e-learning, the future of business, etc. So for those of you in the audience today who want to kind of understand a bit more about your critical thinking, understand your thought processes, it's not an overnight thing, okay? It's really not. It takes time. It takes months, sometimes years in some cases. But one of the things we do at Trynkle is we help people go through that process. We help people to talk about it, help people to understand how they think they are behaving versus how they are actually behaving. And also helps you with decision-making, like I said, careers, new jobs, relationships. So if any of you want to reach out to me, those are my contact details, my company contact details as well. Please reach out to me and we can have a chat about how we can make you more cultivated thinkers, but also whether you actually need to be more cultivated. Maybe you are really cultivated, but you're just not applying it in the most effective way. So thanks for today's session. We've got some questions on the chat. Let me just open that. Okay. So we've got one question, which is about, I wish one of our members asked, in the trolley problem, where an onlooker has the choice to save 5 people in danger of being hit by a trolley, by diverting the trolley to kill just 1 person, it deals a lot with ethics. What is the correlation between critical thinking and being ethical? That's a good question. There isn't really a correlation, and I'll explain it to you, because your ethics ultimately go down to your guiding principles in life. So you can be a critical thinker and a murderer, okay? So if any of you have seen Silence of the Lambs, is a good example. Hannibal Lecter, intelligent, probably one of the most optimal critical thinkers in movie history. So intelligent, thinks through his thought process, self-aware, regardless of what people may think, and enacts his acts like murder or manipulation in really effective ways. And he's gone through a critical thought process to do that effectively. Now, he's doing a bad thing in the end because his ethical standpoint or his lack of ethics are just so predominant that he's just a bad person, right? But so the correlation between the two isn't as one-to-one as you think. In theory, a strong critical thinker who has a neutral bias in anything or neutral ethical stance, shall we say, should always choose the profound right decision to make, okay? So if I were to give you an example about the effort it takes for me to take a can of Coke and throw it in the bin versus throwing it out the window, well, the window is next to me. As a way of solving my problem, which is to just get rid of the can of Coke, it's easy to me just throw it out the window. It takes me another extra 2 minutes to get up, go to the dustbin, put it in the dustbin, take the dust bag outside, roll it up, put it into the recycling bin, blah, blah, blah. But the underlying current of all this is ethically, what do I want to do? Do I want to be a complete idiot and contribute to pollution in the world by throwing it out the window? No, I don't. So I choose option B. Do I not care about climate change and pollution and really don't care about the legal ramifications of me throwing a can out of window? Well, okay, then I'm going to throw it out the window. Okay. So the critical thought process is actually still embedded. You still have to think it out, either option. The ethics just decide ultimately the decision that you make based on your viewpoints on certain things. And I think the can of Coke is a really good example. I mean, if you look at it, most elaborate crimes in the world are as a result of really, really strong critical thought process. The drugs cartels in Mexico, gangsters in Italy, cybercrime, hackers. They are some of the most optimal critical thinkers that you can see out there because they're so good at logically connecting things. And they do it in such a strong, efficient way, but they're doing it for bad reasons. So I think the idea behind your question, the trolley problem is interesting. If you say 5 people in danger of being hit by a trolley by just killing one person, well, the logical answer is to kill one person instead of 5. But the quantification of that one person and the feelings you have of that versus 5 is something really hard to quantify. What happens if it's an old lady? What happens if that one person's your grandma? What happens if, as a quantitative aspect, killing 5 versus killing 1 doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that you've just killed someone, right? So I think the two are not really correlated. I think ethics drives the end decision, but the critical thought process is whether the decision is actually effective and seamless and interactive. There's no more questions on the chat. There's one more question I had on my IG earlier today, which is, Rish, on the critical thought. Okay, sorry, we just got another one before I go to that. Do you think society critically thinks less or more now? I think as a society, we critically think a lot less. And one of the reasons behind that is because we're prescribed information. We're prescribed decision-making. So for instance, for those of you who study, you've seen this, if you're going to do an English exam or a geography exam, it's quite easy to go and get the answers on the internet. So you've already fast-tracked that process of getting the answer because you've gone to the internet. Now, if you're one of those people that decides to drill into the details, then maybe you get away with it. But if you're one of those people that just wants to pass the exam, you're probably not going to be as strong a critical thinker as you think you are. And one of the reasons behind this is just information overload. Do we need to think as critically as we should in the world that we're living now? And that's a really good question, because the answer to that could be no. Well, I don't need to be a strong critical thinker because I've got other people there that can help me make decisions. I've got forums I can read. I've got friends I can reach out to. I've seen thousands of examples of people who have done the same thing as me, and I'm just going to follow what they do. So do we need to be critical thinkers is a really good question. I would personally say yes. Why? Because as individuals, we're still prone to making decisions. Well, we still need to make decisions for ourselves, and we're still prone to making good and bad decisions depending on the personality. So it's not just about the process, it's about the acclimatization of a personality to the process. So I think it is important, but I think society is slightly wayward on this. And it's more it's a generational thing. The young generation at the moment is very focused on what I would say is following the leader type of environment where ideology spurns followers more than critical thinking or intellect. And people like to be part of bandwagons. They like to be part of groups, etc. So I think it's an interesting question, and obviously it varies where you are in the world. The only reason I would say to be a good critical thinker is because then you're sure with yourself that you are as smart and as optimal as you can be. Like, it's one thing me telling you, oh, I'm really smart because I went to this school and I've got my own business and stuff like that, blah 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 blah. I mean, loads of people have done that. But to be sure that when I'm in a domestic environment or in a discussion with people or whatever, that I'm giving my best and I'm intellectually, strong in those forums, I think is important to me. So some people, it's not important for them. So I think that's another part of it that we should do. I'm just going to take one last question from my IG, which was, how much of your day do you spend towards making sure that you're thinking critically? And there's no right answer to this, and there's no wrong answer to this. Firstly, I don't think it's about time. I think it's about you thinking about specific acts at that point in time. So, like I said, what are you going to have for breakfast? What are you going to have for dinner? Don't try to allocate time per task like that. What you should be doing is trying to ingrain your day-to-day mind thought process into being just, subconsciously thinking about these things. And that comes with exposure, it comes with, observance, things like that. So don't try to say, look, I'm going to dedicate 10% of my day to being critical thinking. It doesn't work that way. Try to maybe dedicate 10% of your day to saying, I'm going to try to understand my own mind. I'm going to read more. I'm going to eat more. I'm going to speak to my friends more, things like that. They will still help you build that bubble of critical thinking. So hopefully that helps you with that question. On that note, please reach out to me individually. You've all got my details there. If you want any help or any guidance on thought processes and critical thinking, it's been a pleasure. Thanks to CoSpace Park again for bringing up this topic. I think it's a fantastic topic. And please do join us in 2 weeks' time for the